The named representative, the alert came through at 5:47 a.m. I read it twice before I let myself believe it. Asterisk territory license. Germany expired. 41 titles unavailable. I was standing in my kitchen in the dark, coffee not even poured, while across the city the Aurelian Media Group support inbox filled with the first wave of complaints. 41 titles gone overnight. And nobody on the executive floor knew why. Because the only person who knew why had been walked out of the building 9 days earlier, carrying a cardboard box, while her entire department was reduced to one bullet point on a slide labeled efficiency. Theo had told a room full of people that a robot could do my job. I set my phone face down and finally poured the coffee. Germany was first. Germany was never going to be last. Let me tell you how a woman with no title left can shut down a billion-dollar catalog without touching a single switch. The wall of screens my badge worked for the last time on a Tuesday, though I didn't know it yet. I swiped into the 38th floor at 7:19 a.m. The way I had for 14 years, past the wall of monitors showing every title we streamed live somewhere in the world. A thriller playing in São Paulo, a cooking show in Seoul, a documentary in Lisbon. Someone was watching at 2 a.m. because they couldn't sleep. I used to stand in front of that wall with my coffee and feel something close to pride. Every stream existed because underneath it sat a license. And every license had, at some point, crossed my desk. My name is Lourdes Marchetti. For 14 years, I was Vice President of Rights and Clearances at Aurelian. A title that sounds important until you try to explain it at a dinner party. At which point people's eyes glaze and they ask what you actually do. So I learned to say it plainly. I'm the reason the things you watch don't disappear. Every film, every series, every catalog title we streamed in 43 countries sat on top of a contract with a studio, a distributor, an estate, a foreign rights holder, and every contract had an expiration date. Renewing them wasn't glamorous. It was 1,000 small confirmations a year, a signature here, a wire there, a call to a man in Munich who only answered between 10 and 11 his time, and only if you remembered his daughter's name. From the outside, the system looked automated. Board decks called it rights infrastructure, as if the contracts renewed themselves. They didn't. I renewed them. What no piece of software Aurelian ever bought could do was the human part. Half our most valuable licenses didn't trigger on a calendar date. They triggered on conditions. A renewal that only activated with written notice inside a narrow window. A territory that reverted automatically unless reconfirmed every 24 months. A distributor whose contract lapsed unless renewed by the named representative on file. And the named representative in contract after contract, going back over a decade, was me. Not Aurelian, me. I never hid this. I never advertised it either. It was simply the shape of the job, relationships I'd built, conditions I tracked in my own head, a web of obligations that lived half in our software and half in a gray notebook in my top drawer. For 14 years, that arrangement made me quietly indispensable and entirely invisible. I'd made my peace with it. I told myself the work was the reward. Then Theo Vance arrived. Slide 22, he came in through an acquisition. Aurelian had bought a smaller, flashier streaming brand, and somewhere in the deal Theo had been promised a big chair. He became Chief Content Officer. Maybe 40 years old. Dressed like someone who'd read an article about how founders dress. Talking in the confident shorthand of a man who had never once been responsible for a contract that mattered. The first time we were in a room together, he didn't shake my hand. He looked at my title on the org chart and said, "To the room more than to me, rights and clearances." That's the part we automate first, right? A few people gave the small, careful laugh people give when the new boss jokes and nobody's sure yet how much power he has. I didn't laugh. Some of it's automated, I said. The high-value catalog isn't. The conditional licenses need manual handling. He smiled the way you smile at a child explaining why the sky is a certain color. Everything's automatable, lords. That's not a technology problem. That's a courage problem. Courage. As if courage had ever kept a film from vanishing off a platform at midnight. Over the next month, Theo commissioned a deck. To consultants who had never licensed a single frame of content, produced 40 slides on operational modernization. Slide 22, under a header reading efficiency opportunities. Reduced my department. 6 people, 14 years of institutional memory. A web of relationships across 43 countries. To 1 line, asterisk rights and clearances. Candidate for full automation. Estimated annual savings. $3, $2 million. I found out about the slide before the meeting. Devika, a junior analyst I'd trained myself, slipped into my office, closed the door, and showed me the deck on her phone, her hand not quite steady. I didn't know if you'd seen it, she said. I hadn't. I looked at slide 22 for a long time. Do they understand what you actually do? She asked quietly. That was the whole question, wasn't it? No, I said. They don't. I want to be honest. What I felt wasn't rage. It was something colder and clearer. The stillness in the air right before weather turns. I had spent 14 years building something that looked invisible from the executive floor, but was, in fact, load-bearing. And here was a man who decided that because he couldn't see it. It didn't exist. That night, after the floor emptied and the screen wall kept glowing with its 43 countries of streams, I sat at my desk and opened the gray notebook. Page by page, every conditional clause, every named representative provision, every license that would lapse the moment the human chain behind it broke. I wasn't planning anything yet. I was taking inventory of the truth, the way I always had. What I saw in my own handwriting, going back years, was the shape of how much depended on one person they were about to erase, the man in Munich, the estate in Buenos Aires that reconfirmed only by my signature, the Italian distributor whose entire deal hinged on the named representative on file, 41 titles in Germany riding on a notice window only I tracked. I closed the notebook, put it back in the drawer, went home, and the next morning, I came back and kept the catalog alive. For now, while a man to floors up rehearsed the slide where he made me disappear. The aquarium, the meeting happened on a Thursday. In the glass conference room on the 40th floor that everyone called the aquarium. Because every wall was transparent and anyone in the executive corridor could see straight in. I've thought a lot about why Theo chose that room instead of somewhere private. He wanted an audience. I was called up with no agenda attached to the invite, which after 14 years you learn to read like a tarot card. Theo sat at the head of the table, flanked by his 2 consultants, with HR and a lawyer I'd met exactly once. The screen behind them was frozen on slide 22. Lords, sit, he said, gesturing to the one empty chair, positioned to face the glass wall and the corridor beyond it. I'll be direct, because I respect you enough to be direct. Which is the sentence men say right before being neither. We've completed the operational review. Rights and clearances as a standalone function is a legacy cost center. Manual, slow, a single point of failure built around institutional habit. None taken, I said. We're moving to a fully automated clearance pipeline. Calendar triggers, auto confirmations, the whole thing. We've stress tested it. He glanced at a consultant, who nodded on cue. Honestly, this is exactly the kind of work a robot should do. Pattern matching. Dates and signatures. We don't need a department for dates and signatures. Through the glass behind him, to people from finance slowed in the corridor to watch. Theo saw me notice. That was the point of the room. The clauses that aren't calendar-based, I said. The conditional licenses, the named representative provisions. How does the platform handle those? A flicker. He didn't know what a named representative provision was, and I watched him decide to bulldoze through it anyway. Edge cases. We'll clean them up in transition. Look, I know 14 years feels like it should mean the work is complicated, but complexity is usually just a person protecting their own job. He let that land. We're letting the team go. You included. Effective end of day. HR has your package. The HR folder slid across the table. I didn't touch it. Who's going to send the German notices? I asked. He blinked. The platform. There's a written notice window on the German package. 41 titles. It opens in 8 days and closes in 11. It has to be a signed letter to a specific rights holder, citing a specific clause. The platform doesn't know that window exists because it isn't a date in any system. It's a condition I track. The room went quieter for exactly a second. Then Theo laughed a short, confident bark and looked at his consultants as if to say, "Asterisk, do you hear this? This is exactly what I mean. The mystique. The only I know the secret window thing." He softened his voice into something he clearly thought sounded wise. If a process can't survive one person leaving, it was never a process. It was a hostage situation. We'll be fine. We're always fine. Hand in your badge at the desk. I looked at him, not with anger, honestly. More with grief for the version of this company that used to understand what it was built on. "Okay," I said. I stood, left the folder untouched, and walked out through the corridor while everyone watched, my face giving nothing away. Here's what I've never told anyone. Riding the elevator down. I did the math I'd already done 100 times in that gray notebook. German window opens in 8 days. Argentine, a state reconfirmation due in 19. Italian distributor's named representative renewal lapses at month's end. The Munich call has to happen in his 1-hour window before the 15th. For 14 years, I had made every one of those happen quietly, the day before the deadline. So smoothly, nobody upstairs ever knew a deadline had existed at all. Theo thought he'd fired a cost center. What he'd actually done was remove the only hand that reached out, every single time, at the last possible moment, to keep 43 countries from going dark. And all a hand like that has to do to bring everything down is nothing. In the lobby, I handed my badge to Pavel, the security guard who'd worked that desk longer than I'd worked the catalog. He took it gently, like something fragile. They don't know what they just did, do they, Ms. Marchetti? No, Pavel, I said. They really don't. Number hash the cables let go for 9 days. Nothing happened. That was always going to be true. And it was the part Theo could never understand. A catalog doesn't collapse loudly. The licenses I'd spent 14 years keeping alive were like the support cables of a bridge, invisible. Under tension, silent right up until one of them lets go. I want to be clear about what I did during those 9 days. Nothing. No letters. No calls. No warning. For 14 years, I had reached out at the last possible moment to keep the wall standing. For the first time, I simply didn't reach. There was no sabotage in it, no deleted file, no poised database, nothing a lawyer could ever point to. The licenses didn't lapse because I did something. They lapsed because, for the first time, the person who always saved them at the 11th hour wasn't there to do it. At 5:47 a.m. Central European Time on the 11th day, the German reconfirmation deadline passed unmet. Under a clause I'd personally negotiated and renewed 6 times over a decade. 41 titles reverted to the rights holder, automatically, cleanly, irreversibly. Devika texted me at 6:20. Asterisk Germany is down. 41 titles just vanished overnight. Nobody knows why. They're losing their minds up here. I heard how the morning unfolded upstairs. The platform flagged it as a delivery error. So engineering spent 4 hours treating it like a technical outage, checking servers, restarting edge nodes, finding nothing wrong. Because nothing was wrong technically. The files existed. The platform was healthy. The titles simply no longer had the legal right to exist on it. It was one of the two junior coordinators Theo had kept on for transition support, who finally found the clause and understood what she was looking at. She walked into Theo's office and told him the titles hadn't crashed. They'd lapsed, and there was no getting them back, because the rights had already reverted to an owner under no obligation to relicense anything, and every incentive not to. Devika said Theo's first instinct was to insist it was a mistake. His second was to demand someone just re-up the contract. When the coordinator explained that reacquiring reverted rights meant renegotiating from scratch with a party that now held all the leverage, he told her to make it work. Nobody could make it work. The condition had already triggered. And Germany wasn't isolated. It was the first cable. Once the coordinator understood the kind of clause that had taken it down, she went looking for others and found a web of conditional licenses she'd never been trained to see, named representative provisions. Notice windows, reconfirmation requirements tracked by a single person. By end of day, she'd flagged 11 more licenses approaching their own windows, an estate in Argentina due in 8 days. An Italian distributor whose named representative no longer worked at the company. A French documentary library with a window opening in 2 weeks. Every one of them pointed to the same name. That evening, Devika texted again. Asterisk, they pulled your old contracts. Your name is on everything. Theo asked legal if they can just transfer the name drop clauses to someone else. I stood at my window and felt that same cold calm. Because that was the thing Theo still didn't grasp. A named representative provision doesn't transfer because a company wants it to. It's a term the rights holder agreed to. The deal renews only through the action of one specific person. And that person was no longer in the building and owed the company nothing at all. I hadn't signed anything that stopped me from leaving. I hadn't taken a single document. Everything I knew lived in my own head and in a notebook that was, indisputably, mine. I had simply been the load-bearing element in a structure nobody upstairs had ever bothered to map. And now, one cable at a time, the structure was finding out exactly what it had been resting on. Late that night, my phone rang from an unfamiliar company extension. I let it ring, watching it light up the dark room. I already knew who it was, and I already knew he was, for the first time, starting to understand what he'd done. The boardroom 3 days later. My phone rang again, this time a number I recognized, Solveig Home. Aurelian's general counsel, someone I'd worked alongside 4 years and respected. Lords, I'll be direct, because you've earned it. The board wants you in tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. Boardroom, 40th floor. Coming in as what? A pause. As the only person who understands the catalog, please, it's worse than Germany now. It was. In the 3 days since the reversion, the flagged list had started detonating on schedule, exactly as the contracts dictated. The Argentine estate's window closed. The French documentary library went dark. The Italian distributor sent a coldly polite letter noting that since their named representative was no longer employed by Aurelian, the agreement had lapsed under its own terms. 40-plus titles across 3 territories, gone. A children's animation package out of Copenhagen followed. By the time Solveig called, the number had a shape, $144 million in annualized content value. Reverted or lapsed, much of it unrecoverable. Some of it already being shopped by rights holders to competitors, who understood exactly what was happening to Aurelian's catalog. I walked into the boardroom the next morning. Every seat was full this time for board members. Solveig, a CFO who clearly hadn't slept, and Theo, no longer at the head of the table but moved 1 seat down, which in a room like that is its own kind of verdict. The board chair, Ingrid Larrabee, gestured me to the seat across from him. Ms. Marchetti, thank you for coming. I sat empty-handed. I'd learned years earlier that the person with nothing in her hands is often holding the most. I'll get to it, Ingrid said. In 9 days, we've lost content across 6 territories. Engineering says it isn't technical. Licensing says these are contractual reversions triggered by expired conditions, conditions tracked, in most cases, by you personally, and that you are the named representative on many of our highest value licenses. Is that accurate? It is. Can it be reversed? Some of it. Germany and Argentina are gone, those rights reverted, and the holders have no obligation to relicense. Every hour that passes, they have less incentive to, because our competitors are already calling. The Italian and Danish packages could still be renewed, but only by the named representative within windows that close this week. And I'm the named representative on those. At the far end, Theo finally spoke, his voice working hard to sound in control. This is exactly what I flagged, a single point of failure. Someone who built the entire function around herself so that I built nothing around myself. I said, not raising my voice, which is what made the room go still. I built it around the contracts. The named representative provisions were negotiated by the rights holders, not by me. They wanted a human being accountable, a name they could call, not a corporate inbox. For 14 years, that name was mine. I told you, in that glass room, that the conditional licenses needed manual handling. You called it a courage problem. You put my entire department on one line of a slide and called it efficiency. You could have warned us, Theo said. You watched this happen. Warned you of what? I told you, on the record, in front of HR and legal, that the German window was open and that the platform didn't know it existed. You told me that if a process couldn't survive one person leaving, it was a hostage situation. So I left, and the process did exactly what you said a good process should never do. I let that sit. I didn't touch anything. I didn't delete a file or send a single email. I stopped doing invisible work you'd already decided didn't require a human. You can't sabotage a job you've been told doesn't exist. You can only stop doing it. Solveig spoke, to her credit, plainly. She's correct on the facts. There's nothing actionable here. Ms. Marchetti was terminated. After termination, she had no duty to perform and no duty to warn. The reversions are a consequence of the terminations, not of any act by her. The CFO put his head in his hands. Ingrid looked down the table at Theo for a long, cold moment. Mr. Vance, you told this board automation would save $3.2 million a year. Instead, it has cost us $144 million in content value in 9 days. With more to come, and handed our best catalog to competitors. Is that a fair summary? He opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time since he'd walked in talking about courage, he had nothing. Ingrid turned to me. Can you stop the rest of the bleeding? The packages whose windows are still open. I can, I said, but not as a favor, and not as your VP of Rights and Clearances. She almost smiled. 30 years of running companies had taught her exactly what that meant. Then tell us what you want. Number hash what I wanted, I didn't ask for my old job back. People assume that's how a story like this ends. The wronged woman restored to her desk while everyone claps. That isn't what I wanted, and it isn't what happened. What I asked for was a licensing services agreement. Not employment, a contract. 3 days after Theo walked me out. I'd quietly registered a company, Marchetti Rights Partners, 1 employee, a gray notebook for an office. My firm would take over manual clearance of Aurelian's conditional catalog on retainer, on my terms. The named representative provisions on licenses that hadn't yet lapsed would be repapered to the firm. So the human accountability the rights holders had always required would live somewhere the company couldn't fire on a whim. Ingrid asked the only question that mattered, and the package is closing this week. I can save 4 of the 6, I said, if I make the calls today. The Copenhagen Library and the French documentary catalog can be renewed inside their windows, but only through the named representative. and only if that representative is under contract with someone the rights holders trust. As of this morning, that would be my firm. I paused. Germany and Argentina are gone. I told you they would be, in a room you weren't in 3 weeks ago. Nobody wrote it down. They agreed to everything. Of course they did. The math had already made the decision. I was just the person in the room who could read it. After Theo's ending was quiet, which I think stung him more than a dramatic firing would have. No box, no walk to the elevator. Just a 3-sentence board resolution, noting that the Operational Modernization Initiative was being wound down and that Mr. Vance would be departing to pursue other opportunities. He was gone within the month. His consultants left the week before him. Their 40-slide deck was deleted from the shared drive so thoroughly that when a junior analyst went looking for it later, there was nothing left at all, a fitting end for a document that had tried to erase people. Devika texted me the morning it became official. Asterisk, he cleared his office at 7 a.m. so no one would see. Pavel held the door and said good luck. Sir. Theo didn't answer. I didn't feel triumphant reading it. I felt the way you feel when a long tension finally lets go, not joy. Just the absence of a weight I'd stopped noticing I was carrying. Here's the part one care about more than the money. Once word got out that I'd started my own firm and taken over Aurelian's conditional clearances, other companies started calling. It turned out half the streaming industry ran on the same invisible architecture, conditional licenses. Named representative provisions. Notice windows tracked by one overworked person nobody upstairs could name. All of them one arrogant reorg away from watching their catalogs go dark. Within 4 months, Marchetti Rights Partners had 6 clients and a waiting list. I hired Devika first. Then 2 of the coordinators Aurelian had let go alongside me, the ones who'd spent years being told they were a cost center. I gave them titles that meant something, and a stake in the firm. So no slide anywhere could ever again reduce them to a single line labeled efficiency. I saw Theo, once more, saw is generous, at an industry conference the following spring. One of those glass atrium events where everyone wears a lanyard and pretends the name badge isn't the whole point. I was there as a panelist. He was there as an attendee, which in that world is its own quiet verdict. We ended up near the same coffee station, and for a moment neither of us moved. He didn't say anything about courage or hostage situations, or robots. He just gave a small, stiff nod, the nod of a man acknowledging a fact he'd spent a year refusing to learn and turned back to his coffee. I didn't need him to say anything. The nod was the whole confession. I think about that morning in the glass room sometimes, the room he chose so everyone could watch him make me small. What he never understood is that an audience cuts both ways. The same people who watched him slide that folder across the table were the ones who, months later, watched him clear his office at 7 in the morning so no one would see. The invisible work is still invisible. That never changes. Somewhere tonight, in a building I'll never enter, someone is tracking a notice window nobody upstairs knows exists, keeping a wall standing that no one can see. Being told her function is a candidate for automation. They can't automate the thing they refuse to understand. And the day they decide you don't exist is the day you find out exactly how much they were standing on. I never raised my voice once. I just stopped reaching out my hand, and 43 countries learned what that hand had been holding up.